What is going on, guys? ModzvilleUSA here with a different style of video. Now, this is some footage of me swapping a BIOS chip on a Dreamcast VA1. This is the most common revision of the Sega Dreamcast that you will find out in the wild, and the most popular as well, as you can pop a GD EMU in these guys, and you can only pop it in VA1s. So I've got this BIOS mod chip. I want to link you in the description to the eBay seller I got this from. Very good seller. Highly recommend. So all I've done at this point is just flux up the pins, and you're going to need a heat gun like I have here. I've got a rework station, but you could use any old heat gun from Home Depot, put it on high settings. With the heat gun that I am using, I have it running at 350 degrees at like 6.5 airflow. And you just do circular motions, constantly keep it moving, and just circle across those pins. And the thing with these is you want to make a mental note beforehand where you're going to be moving the chip, and you want to move it away from other components so you don't accidentally wipe one of those off the board. I've done that many times, accidentally wiping another component off the board. Then you're just going to have to make sure to put that back. Maybe take a picture before you do this. Just make sure everything lines up afterwards. And this guy dried a little bit unpleasantly. Had to heat it back up. The main thing you want to know when doing this is you do not want to use any force at all. That's how you rip pads, which you do not want to do. You simply put some tweezers, rest it up against the chip that you're removing, and just do not apply any significant amount of pressure. Do not try to lift, do not try to pull. Once it's ready to go, it will just slide off from you just barely having those tweezers touching the chip. So it's going to take a little bit of practice, and you will get the feel for it very quickly. But you might want to try removing some chips from some boards that are just like some scrap boards that you don't care about before you do a job that actually matters to you. Now, once you get the chip off, you might want to reapply a bit more flux. And I just like to go over, there's a million ways to do this. I just like to add some, load up the tip of my soldering iron with solder, and just go over all of those pads, just making them just nice joints. You just want to make those nice joints. You don't necessarily need to add new solder to it or remove the original solder, but you just want to go ahead and go over all those pads, make them nice and fresh looking, and try to make them as flush as possible. Alright, so you want to put that chip in there. Make sure you have it orientated properly. It's got that, you see that little circle there at the bottom left of the chip? That means that is pin 1. And what I do is I go to all 4 corners. Once you line it up and you feel good about it, you want to go to all 4 corners and just anchor it in. Now, I anchored the first 2 there and I didn't feel good about it. Well, you can just heat up one of those anchored ones, and then you move it to your liking, and that looked good to me there. So then just continue on, anchor them all in, make sure it looks good, make sure you're going to be able to get a nice, easy connection from the pins to the pads there. And you will, it might take a little bit of tinkering to get the technique. Some people do drag soldering. I don't have that down. I always end up bridging it when I try to drag solder. What works really well for me on these, and I've done quite a few now, is I apply a tiny bit of pressure to the pin just to make sure the pin is going down and it's flush with the board, and I do a little drag towards myself. That works for me. Now, if you end up bridging any of the pins, I do not recommend using a desoldering wick, as I have ended up causing damage doing that before on these. The pads below the chip are very delicate and easy to rip. What you want to do is just either you can use a solder sucker, but just taking your iron with the finest point you got, just heat it up and go up and down until you eventually get that solder unlinked there. You do not want to short the pins, but yeah, you can desolder it just by moving your iron across the two sides, and eventually you will get it to where it's unbridged, as long as you don't have an absurd amount of solder on this. And yeah, you just want to go over, apply a little bit of pressure, and drag away from the chip. Works really well for me. And always make sure to reload with flux. That is key. That will help the solder go to where it wants to go. You can use no clean flux. It doesn't really matter if you don't use no clean flux. Just take an extra couple seconds when you're done to get a soft bristle toothbrush, put some rubbing alcohol on it, and clean her up. Now, typically I like to go over each pin a couple times just to make sure that I got it looking proper. Everything's gravy and good and neat and nice and proper. And just heat and drag. Now, what I do when I feel pretty much 100% confident in my joints there is I'll take tweezers and just go between the legs and apply a little bit of pressure. Not enough to rip the pad. You do not want to rip the pad. That would be terrible. But just a little bit, just to make sure that a tiny bit of pressure isn't going to move the leg, because then obviously you do not have a good joint, good connection there, or therefore not connected at all. So I just like to test the legs with some tweezers really quickly. Be careful doing that. I've never done damage doing that, but I suppose if you're a little too ham-fisted, you could absolutely rip a leg from the board. And what I'm doing now, it's just soft bristle brush, 99% rubbing alcohol, and I'm scrubbing away the flux, cleaning her up, making her look real nice. You do not want to leave flux just laying on the board. Alright, so I opted for the alt point that's coming on the GD ROM drive. I'll throw up an image, a better image of what I connected that wire to. It is one from the middle, of the GD EMU drive that I connect that wire to. There are other points, but this is definitely the strongest and easiest to solder to point. You just want to route your cable and make it look nice. Get it in a spot where it's not going to move, it's not loose. Just get it nice and taut. And then I'll throw up another diagram here. We're just going to link two of these pins together. Link one with 23. There it is, one with 23. Now, some people like to route their wires underneath the legs of the BIOS chip. You can do that if you want to. I just think that it's a bit sketchy with 30 AWG wires, as the insulation can just come apart fairly easily sometimes, especially in the process of routing it through underneath the legs of a chip, to where it's something I don't like doing. If any of that insulation scrapes off, you'll have that wire touching a leg of a chip that you don't want it to. As you can see, pretty clean install. It's not the most wire porn install you've probably ever seen, but it does the job. Very sturdy, nothing's coming undone. And that's how you do it, kids. That's how you do a region-free Dreamcast BIOS mod.